You are just the help, so learn your place and take this trash to the dumpster. Those were the first words the father of the groom said to me at my own sister's wedding. He shoved a dripping bag of garbage into my chest, staining my limited edition hoodie. The guests around us snickered, covering their mouths with manicured hands. He thought I was the hired help because I walked in through the service entrance covered in mud. He thought he could humiliate me because I drove a rental car. But as I stood there holding his trash, I looked at the man who was about to become my sister's father-in-law, and I smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the kind of smile a shark gives before it drags you under. Because he had no idea that the bank foreclosure notice in my back pocket had his name on it. And he definitely did not know that I had bought his entire debt portfolio exactly 45 minutes ago. To my right was a third cousin named Chad, who smelled like cheap cologne and whiskey, and was busy trying to balance a spoon on his nose. I took my seat, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. From this distance, Jasmine looked like a doll placed on a shelf. She was laughing at something Connor whispered in her ear, deliberately avoiding eye contact with me. I wanted to stand up and leave. I wanted to march over there and shake her until she remembered who braided her hair when our mother died and who worked 3 jobs to pay for her braces. But I stayed. I stayed because I needed to see exactly how deep the rot in this family went. The first course was served a cold cucumber soup that tasted like watered-down resentment. Across the table near the center, Victoria Sterling, the mother of the groom, finally noticed me. She was a woman who wore pearls the size of golf balls and had a smile that did not reach her eyes. The crowd parted for me instinctively, creating a path between me and the couple. I walked until I was standing right next to them. "Jasmine!" I said, my voice cutting through Connor's stream of lies. Connor tried to block me stepping in front of Jasmine. "Stay away from her, Sophia, you have done enough damage," he spat. I ignored him completely. I looked over his shoulder, locking eyes with my sister. Jasmine looked at me. She blinked, tears spilling over her lashes. She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw the little girl who used to hide behind my legs when it thundered. "You have a choice to make, Jasmine," I said, my tone steady and urgent, "and you have exactly 1 minute to make it." I pointed at the foreclosure notice in my hand. This is reality. The money is gone, the house is gone, the status is gone. The only thing left standing here is the truth. I pointed at Connor. "That man standing in front of you is a liar. He stole $500,000 from us," he mocked me to my face. "And 5 minutes ago he was laughing while his father treated me like a beggar." Connor started to protest, but I raised my voice, drowning him out. "He does not love you, Jasmine. He loves the buffer you provide between him and the real world. He loves that you are quiet. He loves that you are obedient. And most of all, he loves that your sister writes big checks." I took a step closer, my heart aching for her. "You can stay with him. You can hold his hand and walk out of here into a life of debt and lawsuits. You can spend the next 10 years trying to pay off his father's mistakes while he blames you for not asking me for more money." I held out my hand, palm up. "Or you can come with me. You can walk away from the lies. You can walk away from the people who made you feel small. You can come home to a sister who loves you for who you are, not for what you can pay for." Jasmine looked at my hand. Then she looked at Connor. "Baby, do not listen to her," Connor whispered, squeezing her arm so hard I could see his knuckles turning white. "She is jealous. She wants to ruin our happiness. We are the Sterlings. We are royalty." Jasmine looked down at where Connor was gripping her. She looked at the ring on her finger. The massive diamond solitaire that Connor had presented to her with such fanfare, telling everyone it was a family heirloom worth $50,000. She stared at the stone. Under the bright lights of the chandelier, it sparkled, but something was off. Now that the illusion was shattered, she looked closer. She saw the lack of depth. She saw the way it reflected light too perfectly, too superficially. She remembered the day he gave it to her. He had refused to get it appraised for insurance, saying it was bad luck. He had refused to let her take it to a jeweler to get resized, insisting his family jeweler would handle it. "It is fake," she whispered. Connor froze. What? The ring, Jasmine said, her voice trembling but gaining strength. It is fake, isn't it? Just like the house. Just like the job. Just like you. Connor's face went slack. The charm dropped, leaving behind a sneer of pure ugliness. It is a high-quality simulant, he hissed. What does it matter? It looks real. Everything about us looked real, Jasmine. Why do you have to ruin it? That was the spark. The gaslighting finally failed. The fuel ran out. Jasmine looked at him, and for the first time in 2 years, she saw him clearly. She saw a boy playing dress-up in his father's debt. She saw a coward who would sell her out for a quick buck. She remembered the prenup. She remembered him telling her to be quiet at dinner. She remembered him laughing when Preston threw the styrofoam box. She pulled her arm out of his grip. It was a violent motion, a reclamation of her own body. It matters, she said, her voice rising loud and clear. It matters because I am real. My love was real. My sister's sacrifice was real. She grabbed the ring on her finger. She yanked it off, scratching her skin in the process, but she did not care. She held the fake diamond in her hand, feeling its weightlessness. You wanted a trophy wife, Jasmine said, tears streaming down her face, but her chin held high. You wanted a silent partner. You wanted a bank account. She took a step back, creating space between them. Well, the bank is closed, Connor. She threw the ring. She did not toss it gently. She threw it with all the force of her heartbreak. The ring hit Connor square in the face, bouncing off his cheekbone with a sharp crack before falling into the grass. Connor stumbled back, clutching his face more out of shock than pain. You crazy bitch, he shouted, showing his true colors at last. You are nothing without me. You are just a ghetto girl in a fancy dress. Jasmine took a deep breath. She wiped her tears. She looked at him with profound pity. I may be a girl in a dress, she said, but at least I own the dress. You do not even own the suit you are wearing. She turned her back on him. She did not look at Preston, who was still weeping on the ground. She did not look at the guests who were watching with their mouths open. She looked at me. She walked the 5 steps between us. They were the hardest steps she had ever taken, but she took them. She reached out and took my hand. Her grip was tight, shaking, but undeniable. Let us go home, Sophia, she whispered. I squeezed her hand back, feeling the warmth of my sister return to me. Let us go home, I said. I put my arm around her shoulders, shielding her from the stairs, shielding her from the ruin. We turned and began to walk out of the tent. Wait, Connor screamed, running after us. Jasmine, you cannot leave me. What am I supposed to do? I stopped. I turned my head just enough to look at him one last time. I pointed to the styrofoam box that Preston was still clutching. Share the leftovers, Connor, I said. I hear the lobster is delicious when you have to chew on your own regrets. We walked out into the night, leaving the Sterling dynasty in the dark where it belonged. The air outside was cool and clean. As we reached the car, Jasmine rested her head on my shoulder and finally truly exhaled. The nightmare was over. The waking up had begun. The gravel of the driveway crunched under our feet, a sound that was infinitely more satisfying than the polite applause of a fake society. The air outside the tent was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and freedom. Jasmine walked beside me, her hand still gripping mine tightly, as if she was afraid that letting go would cause the nightmare to restart. She was shivering slightly in the night air, her bare shoulders exposed in the strapless gown that had been bought to please a man who never loved her. Without breaking stride, I slipped off my blazer and draped it over her shoulders. She pulled it tight around herself, inhaling the scent of my perfume, a scent that smelled like autonomy and strength. We reached the main circular driveway where the valet stand had been abandoned by the staff, who were likely busy gossiping in the kitchen. My beige rental Honda Civic was parked off to the side, looking sad and dusty under the floodlights. Jasmine looked at it, and then looked at me, a question forming in her eyes. She probably expected us to get in that dented car and drive back to my hotel. She probably thought the story ended with us escaping in the same humble vehicle I had arrived in. But the story did not end there. As we approached the pavement, a pair of blinding white xenon headlights cut through the darkness from the far end of the driveway. A low, guttural rumble shook the ground, a sound so deep and powerful it vibrated in my chest. It was the sound of a twin-turbo V12 engine, an engineering masterpiece that commanded respect simply by existing. The car pulled up slowly, prowling like a panther made of midnight blue steel. It was my Rolls-Royce Phantom, the one I usually kept in the garage at my headquarters. The driver's door opened, and my executive assistant David stepped out. He was immaculately dressed in a black suit, holding the door open with a gloved hand. He did not look at the chaos behind us. He looked only at me. "Good evening, Ms. King," David said, his voice calm and professional. "I took the liberty of bringing the car up from the city as soon as you activated the foreclosure protocol. I assumed you would want a more comfortable ride home." Jasmine's jaw dropped. She touched the hood of the car, her fingers tracing the Spirit of Ecstasy ornament. "Sophia," she whispered. Is this yours?" "It is ours," I corrected her. I nodded to David, who handed me the keys. "I will drive, David. You can take the rental back to the agency. And David, please call the cleaning crew. I want this property scrubbed from top to bottom starting tomorrow morning." "Understood, Ms. King." I opened the passenger door for Jasmine. She slid onto the white leather seats, sinking into the luxury she had been promised by a liar, but was finally being given by a protector. I walked around to the driver's side, my heels clicking on the pavement for the last time on this property while it was still occupied by Sterling's. I slid behind the wheel, feeling the familiar weight of power in my hands. I pressed the ignition button, and the engine purred to life, a sound of pure, unadulterated success. But before I could shift into gear, a frantic figure burst out of the darkness. It was Preston. He was running, stumbling over his own feet, his tuxedo jacket flapping open, his tie undone. He looked deranged, sweat pouring down his purple face, his eyes wide with terror. He threw himself against the driver's side window, banging his fists on the reinforced glass. She tapped her glass with a manicured fingernail, drawing the attention of the nearby guests. "So Sophia Victoria," said, her voice projecting effortlessly over the clinking silverware. "Jasmine was just telling us about your line of work. She mentioned you are in the shipping business." The table went quiet. All eyes turned to me, the outsider in the hoodie at the end of the table. "Yes, that is correct," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I work in logistics and supply chain management." Victoria let out a small, pitying sigh, tilting her head to the side. "Oh, you poor dear, that must be terribly exhausting work. I cannot imagine the physical toll it takes, especially during the holidays when everyone is ordering gifts online. Do your knees hurt from lifting all those heavy boxes all day?" I paused, my spoon hovering halfway to my mouth. She thought I was a delivery driver. "Sophia, wait!" he screamed, his voice muffled by the soundproofing of the car. "Open the window, you have to listen to me." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had greeted me with a bag of trash. I looked at the man who had sneered at my existence. Slowly, calmly, I pressed the button to lower the window just 2 inches. Preston jammed his fingers into the gap, desperate to keep me there. "Sophia, please be reasonable," he panted, his breath fogging up the glass. "You cannot do this. Think about my reputation. Think about the humiliation. If we leave now, everyone will know. Please just give us until Monday. We can work out a payment plan. I have friends in the Senate. I can make calls. Just leave me with some dignity." I stared at him. The word hung in the air between us, heavy and absurd. Dignity. I took a slow breath, letting the silence stretch until he stopped panting. "Dignity is not something you can negotiate, Preston," I said, my voice soft, but colder than the grave. "Dignity is not a house. It is not a boat. And it certainly is not a reputation built on stolen money." I leaned closer to the gap in the window so he could see the fire in my eyes. "You want to talk about dignity? Where was my dignity when your guard told me to walk through the mud? Where was my sister's dignity when you forced her to sign away her rights? Where was my dignity when you threw a box of leftovers at me in front of 200 people? Preston opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. You lost your dignity the moment you decided that my humanity was less important than your aesthetic. You dropped it right there at the service entrance along with the trash you told me to carry. So do not come here asking me to give it back to you. I cannot give you what you threw away yourself. I pressed the button to roll up the window. Preston yanked his fingers back just in time, shouting obscenities, slamming his palms against the glass. I shifted the car into drive. The Rolls-Royce glided forward smooth and unstoppable, leaving him standing alone in the driveway, bathed in the red glow of my taillights. As we reached the main gate, the one where the guard had mocked my Honda Civic, I saw a flurry of activity. Blue and red lights were flashing against the stone walls. 3 black SUVs with federal government plates were blocking the entrance. Men in windbreakers with FBI and IRS printed on the back were swarming the gate. I stopped the car, letting the window down as an agent approached. "Ms. King," the agent asked, checking a clipboard. "That is me," I said. "Thank you for the tip and the digital evidence package you forwarded to our field office an hour ago," the agent said, nodding respectfully. The forensic accounting data was very helpful. "We have a warrant for Preston Sterling for wire fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement. We are moving in to secure the suspect now." I nodded. "He is in the driveway, agent. He is the one screaming at a cloud of exhaust fumes. You cannot miss him." The agent signaled his team, and the convoy of law enforcement vehicles roared past us, heading toward the house to finish what I had started. I watched them go, in the rearview mirror, a parade of justice marching into the night. I drove through the open gates, the tires humming on the asphalt, as we left the Sterling estate behind forever. Inside the car, it was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a war is won. Jasmine was looking out the window, watching the vineyards blur past in the darkness. She reached over and turned on the radio. A soft R&B song filled the cabin, replacing the sound of sirens fading in the distance. So Jasmine said, her voice small but steady, "We are homeless." I smiled, keeping my eyes on the road. "We are not homeless, Jasmine. We are between castles. And besides, I have been looking at a penthouse in the city. It has a view of the bay and a walk-in closet big enough to sleep in. And the best part is the landlord is me." Jasmine let out a laugh, a real, genuine laugh that sounded like music. She leaned her head back against the seat, closing her eyes. "You really are a dragon, aren't you, Sophia?" I glanced at her. "What do you mean?" "Mom used to read us that story about Cinderella," Jasmine murmured. "About the girl who was treated like a servant and needed a fairy godmother and a prince to save her. I spent my whole life waiting to be Cinderella. I thought if I was good enough and quiet enough, the prince would come." She opened her eyes, looking at me with admiration. "But you never wanted to be Cinderella. You were the dragon guarding the mountain. You burned the whole kingdom down just to get me out of the tower." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, feeling the truth of her words settle in my bones. She was right. For too long, society has told women, especially women who look like us, that our only path to victory is to be chosen, to be meek, to wait for permission. They tell us to smile when they insult us. They tell us to shrink so they can feel big. They tell us that if we work hard in silence, eventually someone will hand us a glass slipper. But I learned a long time ago that glass slippers shatter. They cut your feet. They make you bleed. I looked at the road stretching out before us, illuminated by the headlights of my own car. They looked at me and saw a maid. They looked at me and saw a victim. They thought I was a character in their story, a prop to be moved around and discarded. They forgot that in every fairy tale there is a force of nature that cannot be tamed. I am not Cinderella. I do not need a prince to save me. I do not need a castle built on credit. I am the builder. I am the banker. And I am the fire that cleanses the earth so something new can grow. I looked at Jasmine, my sister, who was finally free. If you ever find yourself standing in a room where people cannot see your worth, do not ask for a seat at their table, I said softly, more to myself than to her. Build your own table. And if they try to burn it down, Teach them that you are the one who controls the flame. I pressed my foot down on the accelerator. The car surged forward, eating up the miles heading toward a future that belonged entirely to us. We drove into the night, two queens returning to their true throne. And behind us the sterling empire crumbled into dust, a cautionary tale for anyone foolish enough to mistake quiet for weakness. This is Sophia King signing off. And remember, if you ever have to choose between being liked and being respected, choose respect. It lasts longer and it pays better. Good night. Sophia's story is a powerful reminder that your worth is never defined by someone else's inability to see it. The Sterlings mistook silence for weakness, but true power doesn't need to shout until it's time to deliver the final verdict. We often waste years waiting for toxic family members to validate us, forgetting that we hold the deed to our own lives. You do not need a seat at a table where you are treated like a servant. You have the power to build your own. Real family isn't about blood, it's about respect. Be your own savior, secure your own assets, and never apologize for the empire you built from scratch. If this story inspired you to level up and cut off toxic ties, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of resilience. Have you ever had to remind someone who you really are? Tell me your story in the comments below. She thought the founder and CEO of Aurora Tech, a company that revolutionized global freight algorithms and was currently valued at over $2 billion on the NASDAQ, was driving a brown truck and dropping off packages on porches. I looked at Jasmine, waiting for her to correct her future mother-in-law, waiting for her to say, actually, Mom Sophia owns the company, she does not drive the trucks. But Jasmine just took a long sip of her wine, hiding her face behind the glass. I took a deep breath, ready to educate Victoria on the difference between a courier and a chief executive officer. Actually, Mrs. Sterling, I do not lift boxes. I own a— Mom, stop it. Connor interrupted, his voice loud and booming. He was cutting into a steak with aggressive motions, not even looking at me. Do not make her uncomfortable. Honest work is honest work, right, Sophia? He looked up, then winking at me. It was not a friendly wink. It was a warning. We know how hard it is for people from your background to find steady employment. Connor continued, flashing a grin at his friends, who snickered quietly. As long as it is legal, of course. We know how easy it is for people in your neighborhood to get caught up in the wrong kind of hustle. The air left the room. It was a direct hit. A microaggression so sharp it drew blood. He was implying that because I was black and dressed casually, any money I made must be from drugs or fraud. He was reducing my empire, built on sleepless nights and brilliant code, to a stereotype. I gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles turned white. The disrespect was breathtaking. But what killed me was not Connor's racism. It was typical. It was expected. What killed me was Jasmine. She set her glass down and forced a laugh, a hollow, brittle sound that shattered my heart. She was laughing along with them. She was letting them mock the sister who sacrificed her entire 20s so Jasmine could live in this fantasy world. I leaned back in my chair, my appetite gone. I decided right then and there that I was done playing nice. I pulled out my phone under the table and sent a text to my assistant. Initiate the acquisition now. I do not care what the premium is. Buy the debt. While I was silently purchasing their financial freedom just to hold it over their heads, Preston Sterling stood up at the head of the table. He was red in the face from too much expensive scotch, and he looked like a man who loved the sound of his own voice. Attention, everyone! Preston bellowed. We have a slight change to the program for tomorrow's ceremony. He looked down the table, his eyes locking onto me with cold disdain. We have decided to streamline the speeches at the reception. Usually we would have the maid of honor speak, but we feel it is best to keep things polished. We want to maintain a certain level of sophistication for our distinguished guests. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air like a foul odor. So only the best man and I will be giving toasts. We do not want any unscripted moments or slang confusing our investors. We want to make sure the language used represents the Sterling brand properly. He did not say my name, but he did not have to. He was banning me from speaking because he thought I was too ghetto. He thought I would stand up there and embarrass them with broken English and street talk. He had no idea that I spoke 4 languages and had given keynotes at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Preston raised his glass in a mock toast to me. I am sure you understand, Sophia. It is for the best. You can just enjoy the free meal and relax. I looked at Preston, then at Connor, and finally at Jasmine, who was staring fixedly at the floral centerpiece. I picked up my glass of water. I understand perfectly, Preston, I said, my voice calm and clear, carrying all the way from the cheap seats. You want to make sure the speeches reflect the true value of this family. Preston nodded arrogantly, not catching the double meaning. Exactly. I took a sip of water, hiding the smirk that was threatening to break through. Do not worry, Preston, I whispered to myself. I will not make a speech. But when I am done with you, your brand will be worth less than the mud on my shoes. The dinner continued with laughter and clinking glasses, but I sat in silence watching the candle at my table burn down. They thought they had silenced me. They thought they had put me in my place. But they forgot one crucial thing about people who build empires from nothing. We do not need a microphone to be heard. We speak in contracts, we speak in leverage, and tomorrow when the foreclosure notice hits the table, the only sound in the room will be the sound of the Sterling legacy crumbling to dust. The hallway leading to the bridal suite was lined with portraits of Sterling ancestors, all of them white, all of them staring down with judgmental eyes. My heels sank into the plush carpet as I marched toward my sister's room. The humiliation from the rehearsal dinner was still burning under my skin, but it was slowly being replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I was not angry at Preston or Connor anymore. I expected wolves to act like wolves. But Jasmine, my sweet, innocent Jasmine, who I had shielded from every storm since she was 6 years old, she had thrown me to the wolves and then laughed while they tore me apart. I did not knock. I pushed open the heavy oak door and stepped inside. The room was massive, larger than the entire apartment we grew up in. It was filled with bouquets of white lilies and gifts from well-wishers, but the air inside felt stale and suffocating. Jasmine was sitting on the edge of the 4-poster bed, still wearing her dinner dress. Her face was buried in her hands and her shoulders were shaking. She looked up when she heard the door close. Her mascara was running down her cheeks in black streaks, ruining the perfect image she had tried so hard to maintain downstairs. When she saw it was me, she flinched. Actually flinched, as if I was the one who had hurt her. Sophia, please, she whispered, her voice cracking. Do not yell at me. I cannot handle it right now. I stood by the door, my arms crossed over my chest. I wanted to yell. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her until she woke up. But seeing her like this, so small and broken in this big, expensive room, I just felt tired. I am not going to yell, Jasmine, I said, my voice dangerously calm. I just want to understand. I want to understand why I just sat through 2 hours of insults from your future family, and my own sister did not say a single word. I want to understand why you laughed when they called me a delivery driver. Do you think that is funny? Do you think the sacrifices I made to put you through art school and get you into those social circles are a joke? Jasmine wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of black on her cheek. You do not understand, Sophia. You do not know what it is like. They are just different. They have a certain way of joking. If I do not laugh, they will think I am uptight. They will think I do not belong. I walked closer to the bed, looking down at her. So to prove you belong, you have to humiliate your blood. Is that the price of admission to the Sterling family, Jasmine? Because if it is, the cost is too high. Jasmine stood up, then frustration flashing in her eyes. Stop acting like you are better than them, Sophia. You are always so defensive. Connor told me to just play along. He said if this wedding goes smoothly, if his father is happy, then he will finally get his shares in the company. Do you know how much those shares are worth? Millions. We will be set for life. Before I tell you how I turned his $1 million estate into my personal property, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by people who judge a book by its cover. My name is Sophia, and at 34 years old, I have learned that silence is expensive, but revenge is priceless. Growing up, I raised my sister Jasmine after our parents passed. I worked double shifts, skipped meals, and eventually built Aurora Tech from a garage startup into a billion-dollar logistics empire. But to the Sterling family, I was just Jasmine's struggling sister, the one with the rough hands and the invisible bank account. The nightmare began the moment my tires hit the gravel of the Sterling estate in Napa Valley. It was supposed to be the happiest day of Jasmine's life, but the universe apparently had other plans, starting with my transportation. I just need you to swallow your pride for one weekend. Just one weekend. Is that too much to ask after everything I have done? I stared at her, stunned. Everything she had done. She spoke as if surviving inside a mansion was hard labor. But what chilled me was the way she repeated Connor's words. It was not her voice. It was his. He had programmed her. He had convinced her that my dignity was the only obstacle standing between them and their fortune. "You are being gaslighted, Jasmine," I said quietly. "Connor is manipulating you. He makes you feel like you are lucky he chose you. He makes you feel like you have to earn his love by erasing who you are, by erasing me." "No, he loves me," Jasmine shouted, defensive now. "He protects me. You are just jealous because you are alone and I am marrying into a dynasty." I looked at my sister, and I did not see the vibrant, artistic girl I raised. I saw a shell, a frightened, desperate woman who would sell her soul for a pat on the head. I was about to turn around and leave to let her sleep in the bed she had made when something on the vanity table caught my eye. Amidst the clutter of makeup brushes and perfume bottles sat a thick document bound in blue legal paper. It was open to a page flagged with a yellow sticky note. I walked over to the table. "What is this?" I asked, reaching for the document. Jasmine rushed forward, trying to grab it, but I was faster. "Stop, do not touch that. It is private." I held the document up, reading the bold text at the top. Prenuptial agreement. I flipped to the flagged page, ignoring Jasmine's protests. My eyes scanned the legal jargon and my blood turned to ice. I had read hundreds of contracts in my career. I knew a bad deal when I saw one. But this was not a deal. This was a death sentence. Clause 4.2. In the event of a divorce, regardless of the duration of the marriage, the spouse Jasmine hereby waives all rights to alimony or spousal support. Clause 7. 1. Any weight gain by the spouse exceeding 20 pounds during the marriage shall be grounds for immediate annulment with no financial compensation. Clause 12.5. All intellectual property, business ventures, or assets acquired by the spouse during the marriage shall be considered the sole property of the husband, Connor Sterling. I looked up at Jasmine, holding the paper like it was burning my skin. "Jasmine, did you read this?" She looked away, biting her lip. "Connor explained it to me. He said it is just standard boilerplate language for families of their stature. He said his dad insisted on it. It does not matter anyway because we are never getting divorced. He said if I sign it without making a fuss, it shows I trust him. It proves I am not marrying him for his money." I laughed. A dry, humorless sound. "Standard." "Jasmine, this is not standard. This is a trap. He can cheat on you, leave you, starve you, and you walk away with nothing. And look at this clause about assets. If you sell a painting, if you start a gallery, he owns it. He owns you." "He would never do that," she insisted, her voice trembling. "He loves me. You are just trying to ruin this because you hate them. You hate that I am happy." I slammed the document down on the table, making the perfume bottles rattle. "Happy? You are crying in the dark the night before your wedding. You are letting them treat your sister like a servant. You are signing away your human rights because you are afraid he will leave you if you ask a single question. That is not love, Jasmine. That is a hostage situation." Jasmine sank back onto the bed, sobbing uncontrollably now. I have to sign it, Sophia. I have to. If I do not, the wedding is off. The invitations are sent. The guests are here. I cannot be the girl who got dumped at the altar. I cannot go back to being nobody. I looked at her and realized that words were useless. Fear had its claws deep in her throat. She was terrified of losing the illusion of power she thought this marriage gave her. She did not know that the power was already gone. I walked to the door, my hand resting on the brass handle. Fine, sign it, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Sign your life away. But remember this moment, Jasmine. Remember that I tried to save you. And when this house of cards falls down, do not say I did not warn you. I walked out, closing the door softly behind me. I stood in the hallway alone with the dead ancestors of the Sterling family. I pulled out my phone. The screen illuminated my face in the dark corridor. I had an email from my legal team. The acquisition of the Sterling debt was finalized. The wire transfer had cleared. Jasmine thought she had no choice. She thought she was powerless. But she was wrong. She had me. And I was about to show Connor Sterling and his father exactly what happens when you mess with the wrong family. I tapped the screen and dialed a number. Prepare the foreclosure notice, I whispered into the phone. And bring the car around. I have one more stop to make before the wedding starts tomorrow. I walked down the hallway, the sound of my footsteps echoing like the ticking of a bomb. The crying in the bedroom had stopped, but the war had just begun. They wanted a wedding. I was going to give them a funeral for their legacy. The morning sun over Napa Valley was aggressive, beating down on the manicured lawns of the Sterling estate with a heat that made the air shimmer. It was the kind of perfect lighting that photographers dream of, but for me, it was just a spotlight for the humiliation that was about to unfold. I had changed into the dress Jasmine had approved, a simple navy blue number that cost more than my first car, but was understated enough not to offend the delicate sensibilities of the Sterling clan. I walked out to the rose garden where the family portraits were taking place, my head held high despite the heaviness in my chest from the night before. The scene was picturesque. Jasmine looked breathtaking in her custom lace gown, standing next to Connor, who was preening like a peacock in his tuxedo. The bridesmaids, a flock of Connor's cousins and childhood friends, were giggling in their pastel pink dresses, looking like a row of expensive macarons. Preston and Victoria stood center stage, radiating the kind of ownership that comes from thinking the world revolves around you. I approached the group, waiting for someone to wave me over. Jasmine saw me and offered a weak smile, but she did not move to make space. It was the photographer, a man named Pierre, with a pretentious scarf and an even more pretentious attitude, who spoke first. "Okay, everyone, squeeze in tight," Pierre shouted, waving his hands. "We need the immediate family front and center. Parents of the groom on the right, bride and groom in the middle. Sister of the bride, you just stand on the end, no further down. Yes, there, behind the rose bush." I stepped to the far left, feeling the thorns of the bush snagging on my dress. I was barely in the frame, separated from my sister by 3 bridesmaids who refused to shimmy over. Pierre snapped a few photos, frowning at his digital screen after each one. He sighed loudly, clearly frustrated. "Something is not working," Pierre muttered, tapping his chin. "The composition is off. It feels unbalanced." Preston, who was posing with his hand in his pocket like a catalog model, stepped forward. He squinted at the screen, then turned his gaze toward me. His eyes were cold, calculating, and filled with that specific brand of polite malice that rich people perfect over generations. "It is the lighting," Pierre Preston said, his voice carrying across the garden. "The contrast is too high on the left side. She is absorbing too much light. It is throwing off the white balance of the entire photo. You know how it is. We need to keep the tone airy and bright." My stomach dropped. Absorbing too much light. It was a photography term weaponized into a racial slur so precise that if I called him out on it, he would claim I was being sensitive. He was saying I was too black for their perfect white wedding. He was saying my skin color was a technical error that needed to be corrected. Pierre nodded vigorously, grateful for the excuse. You are right, Mr. Sterling. Okay, you in the blue. Can you step out of the frame for a moment? We will do the family shots without you first, and maybe try to squeeze you in later if we have time. Jasmine opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at Connor, who was busy checking his reflection in his watch. Just for a second, Sophia, Connor said dismissively. We want the lighting to be perfect. I stepped out of the frame, my heart pounding a rhythm of pure rage against my ribs. I stood next to the equipment table, watching them smile, watching them be the perfect family without the stain of my presence. They looked relieved, as if the photo was finally clean. After 10 minutes of snapping photos where they laughed and hugged, Pierre called for a break to change lenses. The bridesmaids immediately broke formation, fanning themselves and complaining about the heat. My private jet had been grounded due to a mechanical issue in San Jose, and my usual driver was stuck in gridlock traffic. Not wanting to miss the rehearsal dinner, I did the only thing a pragmatic person would do. I rented the last available car at the airport, a beige Honda Civic that smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and wet dog. I pulled up to the main gate of the Sterling Vineyard, feeling the exhaustion of a 20-hour workday settling into my bones. I was wearing a black hoodie and leggings. To the untrained eye, I looked like I had just rolled out of bed. To those who know quality, my outfit cost more than the security guard's annual salary. The guard, a man with a thick neck and an even thicker attitude, stepped out of his booth. He did not even look at my invitation. He just waved his hand dismissively. Deliveries and staff are at the south gate, he barked, turning his back to me. I rolled down the window, trying to keep my voice steady. Excuse me, I am not staff. One of them, a blonde girl named Courtney, who had spent the entire rehearsal dinner looking at me like I was a zoo animal, walked over to where I was standing in the shade. Oh my God, it is literally roasting out here, Courtney whined. She looked at me and, without asking, thrust her sequined clutch into my hands. Do you mind holding this? I need to fix my lipstick and I do not want to put it on the grass. Thanks. Before I could answer, another bridesmaid walked over. Me too, thanks. My phone is overheating. Then another, and another. Within seconds, I was standing there holding 5 heavy designer bags, a bouquet of flowers, and someone's half-drunk mimosa. I was not the sister of the bride. I was not the CEO of a billion-dollar company. I was the coat rack. I was the help. Preston walked by, sipping his own drink. He paused, looking at me, laden down with his family's possessions. He did not offer to help. He just smirked. See, Preston said softly, only for me to hear. You finally found a way to be useful. It suits you, Sophia. Serving others is a noble profession. Maybe after the wedding I can speak to the kitchen staff about finding you a permanent position. The snap inside my brain was audible. It was not a loud explosion. It was the quiet, terrifying sound of a cable snapping under too much tension. I looked at Preston. I looked at the smug bridesmaids checking their makeup. I looked at Jasmine, who was letting Pierre adjust her veil completely, ignoring the fact that her sister was being treated like a servant. Useful. I repeated the word, feeling it taste like ash in my mouth. Preston turned to walk away, thinking he had won, thinking he had finally broken me. I am not a coat rack, I said, my voice low but vibrating with intensity. Preston stopped and turned back, raising an eyebrow. Excuse me. I said, I am not a coat rack, and I am certainly not your servant. I opened my hands. Gravity took over. The sequined clutches, the expensive leather handbags, the mimosa glass. Everything fell. It hit the manicured grass with a heavy thud, followed by the shatter of crystal and the wet splash of orange juice soaking into pink silk purses. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet garden. Every head turned. The bridesmaids gasped in horror. Courtney shrieked, diving for her bag. My Valentino clutch, you crazy witch! You ruined it! Preston's face turned a shade of purple that matched the veins throbbing in his neck. What the hell do you think you are doing? He roared, stepping toward me. Pick that up! Pick that up right now! I stepped over the pile of expensive accessories, my heels sinking into the soft earth. I stood toe to toe with Preston Sterling. I was shorter than him, but in that moment I felt 10 feet tall. No, I said. The word hung in the air, absolute and terrifying. I picked up your trash yesterday, Preston. I picked up your son's slack for 5 years. I picked up the tab for this entire wedding. But I am done picking up after you. Preston sputtered, his hands shaking. You ungrateful little security. Get this woman out of my sight. She is ruining the aesthetic. Jasmine finally ran over her face, pale. Sophia, please apologize. Just pick them up. You are making a scene. I looked at my sister, and for the first time, I did not feel the urge to protect her. I felt the urge to leave her to the wolves she loved so much. I am not making a scene, Jasmine, I said, brushing past her. I am making an exit. Enjoy your pictures. I hope the white balance is perfect now that I am gone. I turned and walked away, leaving them scrambling in the dirt for their possessions. As I walked back toward the main house, the adrenaline was coursing through my veins. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from the sheer power of finally saying no. Let them have their photos. Let them have their fake smiles. Because I had something better. I had the foreclosure notice in my car. And when I came back, I was not going to be standing on the sidelines. I was going to be the one holding the camera, and I would be the one deciding who got cut from the picture permanently. I walked away from the garden, leaving the chaos of the ruined photo shoot behind me. My hands were still trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally standing up for myself. I needed a moment to breathe. I needed a place where I was not being judged or ordered around. I wandered toward the east wing of the estate, a section of the house that seemed quieter than the rest. The hallway was lined with dark oak paneling, and the air smelled of old leather and expensive cigars. I saw a heavy double door slightly ajar at the end of the hall. It looked like a library or a study. Perfect. I just wanted 5 minutes of silence to compose myself before facing the circus again. But as I approached the door, intending to slip inside for some peace, voices drifted out from the room. Loud, angry voices. I froze. I recognized that booming baritone immediately. It was Preston. And the younger pleading voice answering him was Connor. I should have walked away. I should have turned around and gone back to my rental car. But my instincts, the same instincts that helped me navigate hostile boardrooms and close billion-dollar deals, told me to stay. I pressed my back against the wall just out of sight and listened. You are an idiot, Connor, Preston growled. I heard the sound of glass slamming onto a table. How could you let that woman cause a scene in the garden? Do you know who was watching? The editor of Napa Living was standing right there. We cannot afford bad press right now, not with the creditors breathing down our necks. It wasn't my fault, Dad, Connor whined. Sophia is crazy. She just snapped. I told you we shouldn't have invited her. We had to invite her, Preston snapped. It would look suspicious if the bride's only family wasn't here. People talk, Connor. And we need people to think everything is perfect. We need them to think the Sterling Empire is as strong as ever. There was a pause, and then the sound of liquid being poured. Speaking of strong, Connor, are you absolutely sure about the girl? Does Jasmine suspect anything? No, Dad. She is clueless. Connor laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. She thinks we are just experiencing some temporary cash flow issues because of expansion. She believes whatever I tell her. And the money Preston pressed, the dowry, the transfer. Is it secure? Because if we do not wire $400,000 to Ocean Bank by Monday morning, they are seizing the fleet. And if we lose the ships, we lose everything. This house, the vineyard, all of it. I held my breath. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I was afraid they could hear it. It is handled, Connor said, his voice dripping with arrogance. Jasmine transferred the money this morning, $500,000. She thinks it is a down payment for that house in the hills I showed her, the one with the infinity pool. Preston chuckled darkly. The house we cannot afford. Exactly. Connor said. I told her we needed to move fast to secure the bid. She wired it to my personal account immediately. She didn't even ask to see the purchase agreement. I told you she is desperate to please me. And her sister. God, that woman is a nightmare, but her money is real. Jasmine said Sophia sent that cash specifically for the house. So we are using the sister's money to pay off the father's debt, Preston mused. Poetic justice. That arrogant woman thinks she is better than us because she made some lucky tech investments. Little does she know she is bailing out the very family she hates. They both laughed. It was the sound of two predators congratulating themselves on a successful kill. I stood in the hallway paralyzed. The $500,000. The money I had worked for, the money I had wired to Jasmine just yesterday, thinking I was securing her future, was being stolen. They were not just insulting us. They were robbing us. They were taking my hard-earned money to patch up their crumbling empire while planning to leave my sister homeless and broke. My hand moved to my pocket. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled out my phone. I opened the voice recorder app and hit the red button. Just make sure Jasmine stays happy until the check clears, Preston said. Once the bank is paid, we can worry about the rest. Maybe we can convince her that the house sale fell through. Blame it on the market. She is too naive to know the difference. She will believe it, Connor assured him. She worships me, Dad. Honestly, it is kind of pathetic. But hey, it pays the bills. I recorded every word, every laugh, every admission of guilt. I lowered the phone and stopped the recording. My hand was steady now. The anger that had been burning inside me had cooled into something solid and deadly. I wasn't just going to ruin their wedding, I was going to send them to prison. I looked down at my phone. The file was saved. Evidence of fraud. Evidence of theft. I stepped away from the door, my footsteps silent on the thick carpet. I walked back down the hallway, the voices of the men who thought they had won fading behind me. You think Jasmine is pathetic, Connor? I thought. You think I am just a checkbook. I walked out into the bright sunlight of the afternoon. The guests were starting to gather for the ceremony. The music was playing. The flowers were perfect. It was a beautiful setting for a massacre. They wanted to steal $500,000 from me. Fine. I would let them keep it. Because by the time I was done with them, that money would be the least of their problems. I checked my email. I am Sophia, the sister of the bride. I have a VIP pass. The guard turned back slowly, a smirk playing on his lips as he looked from my face to the dented Honda Civic. Right, and I am the King of England. Look, lady, we have had 3 people try to crash this wedding already. The Sterlings do not have family who drive beaters. Now turn this piece of junk around and use the service road if you are here to wash dishes. If you are not on the staff list, you need to leave before I call the sheriff. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. I could have called the head of security. I could have pulled up my net worth on my phone and shoved it in his face, but I heard Jasmine's voice in my head begging me not to cause a scene. She was so desperate for this family's approval. I took a deep breath. Fine. Which way is the service road? He pointed to a dirt path that looked more like a hiking trail than a road. Around back. And do not park near the Bentleys. The foreclosure notice was ready to be served. The audio file was ready to be played. I walked toward the ceremony seating not as a victim but as the executioner. Monday morning was going to be a very bad day for the Sterling family. But today was going to be worse. The ceremony was held in the sunken garden, a masterpiece of landscape architecture that Preston Sterling had undoubtedly mortgaged to the hilt. White roses cascaded down the stone arches, and the string quartet began to play a melody that was hauntingly familiar. It was the same song our mother used to hum while cooking breakfast in our cramped apartment years ago. Hearing it here in this place of pretension and lies felt like a violation. I clutched my purse tighter, feeling the weight of the phone inside. The recording of Connor and Preston plotting to steal my money was burning a hole in my pocket, but I told myself to wait. I needed to see this through. I needed to see exactly how far they would go to erase me. I walked toward the front row on the left side of the aisle. By tradition and by right, that was the seat reserved for the parents of the bride. Since our parents were gone, and I had been the one to sign Jasmine's report cards, pay for her braces, and dry her tears after every heartbreak, that seat belonged to me. It was the only place I could be. But when I reached the front row, I stopped cold. The seats were full. Sitting in the places of honor were three men in gray suits. I recognized them immediately. They were not family. They were not friends. They were the senior loan officers from Ocean Bank, the very men Preston owed millions to. He had given my seat the seat of the mother figure to his creditors in a desperate attempt to impress them. "Excuse me," I said, stepping forward, my voice low. "I believe there has been a mistake. I am the sister of the bride." One of the men looked up, adjusting his glasses. He looked at me with the same dismissal one would give a stray cat. "There are no assigned seats for you here, miss. We were escorted here personally by Mr. Sterling." Before I could respond, the wedding planner, a frantic woman named Jessica with a headset and a clipboard, appeared at my elbow. She looked terrified. "Ms. Sophia, please come with me," she whispered, grabbing my arm with a grip that was surprisingly strong. We made a last-minute adjustment to the seating chart. Adjustment. That was a polite word for displacement. She marched me past the second row, past the third, past the friends and the distant cousins. She walked me past the people I had fed at my own table. We kept walking until we reached the fifth row. It was the very last row of chairs, positioned awkwardly close to the catering tent. "Here we go," Jessica said, forcing a bright, fake smile. "This is a great spot. You will have a panoramic view of the whole procession." I looked at the seat. It was right next to the service entrance, where the waiters were stacking dirty trays. The smell of dish soap and old grease wafted over the scent of the roses. "You cannot be serious," I said. "You want the woman who raised the bride to sit next to the trash cans." "Mr. Sterling was very specific," Jessica hissed, dropping the customer service act. "He said the front rows are for VIPs and key stakeholders. He said you would understand because you are practical. Now please sit down. The music is changing." I sat. Not because I agreed, but because my legs suddenly felt too heavy to hold me up. I sat in the exile of the fifth row, surrounded by strangers who looked at me with confusion. Why was the sister of the bride sitting in the nosebleed section? Then the music swelled. The heavy oak doors at the top of the stairs opened and Jasmine stepped out. She was breathtaking. The dress I had paid for shimmered in the sunlight. She looked like a princess from a fairy tale, but her eyes were darting around the crowd with frantic, nervous energy. She was looking for me. I saw the moment she found me. Her eyes traveled past the front row, past the bankers, and landed on me sitting in the back near the kitchen tent. For a second I saw shame flash across her face. She knew this was wrong. She knew this was the ultimate disrespect. But then she did what she always did. She looked away. She fixed her gaze on Connor waiting at the altar and kept walking. She chose the illusion of perfection over the reality of my love. The walk down the aisle seemed to take an eternity. When she finally reached the altar, the music faded and the priest began to speak. It was the standard liturgy words about love and honor that felt like lies in this setting. Then came the moment I had been dreading, the moment that every parent or guardian dreams of. "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" the priest asked, his voice echoing through the garden. My heart hammered against my ribs. By all rights, I should be the one standing. I was the one who worked double shifts to buy her prom dress. I was the one who sat up with her when she had the flu. I was her mother, her father, and her sister, all wrapped in one tired body. I instinctively straightened my back, ready to stand up and say I do, even from the back row. I would not let her stand there alone. But before I could move, a man in the second row stood up. I froze. He was a tall, older white man with distinguished silver hair and a tuxedo that fit perfectly. I had never seen him before in my life. I knew every friend Jasmine had. I knew every distant relative. This man was a stranger. "I do?" The stranger said, his voice deep and authoritative. A murmur went through the crowd. "Who is that?" people whispered. I looked at the program resting on my lap. My hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled. There, under the section titled Procession, it read, Bride, escorted by Uncle Arthur. We did not have an Uncle Arthur. I stared at the back of Preston Sterling's head. He was nodding approvingly. He had hired an actor. He had literally hired a white man to play a fake relative because having a black sister give the bride away ruined his aesthetic. He wanted the picture-perfect image of old money, and I was the flaw he had edited out. Jasmine took the stranger's arm and smiled up at him. She accepted the lie. She let this paid imposter take the credit for 20 years of my blood, sweat, and tears. I felt something break inside me. It was not a snap like before. It was a crumbling. The last wall of defense I had built around my heart for her disintegrated. I sat back in my chair next to the smell of dish soap and watched the ceremony continue. I did not cry. Crying was for family. Crying was for people who had hope. I had neither. I looked at the bankers in the front row. They were my peers now. Not family, just business partners. Okay, Jasmine, I whispered to myself, my voice lost under the drone of the priest's sermon. You want a show? I will give you a finale you will never forget. I reached into my bag and pulled out the foreclosure notice. I smoothed out the wrinkles on the paper. The ceremony was almost over. The reception was next. And when Preston took that microphone to brag about his legacy, I was going to introduce him to his new landlord. The actor sat down. The vows began. I checked my watch. The wire transfer to buy the debt had officially cleared 4 minutes ago. I owned the chair Preston was sitting on. I owned the altar they were standing on. And in about an hour, I would own the wreckage of their lives. I sat in the back row and waited. The seat of humiliation was about to become the throne of judgment. The sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the garden, as the priest gestured for Connor to begin his vows. The silence in the venue was absolute, broken only by the soft rustle of expensive fabrics and the distant chirp of a bird that sounded suspiciously like it was laughing at us. From my seat in the back row next to the catering tent, I had a perfect view of the back of everyone's heads. I watched the bankers checking their watches. I watched the fake uncle shifting his weight comfortably in shoes he probably didn't pay for. And I watched my sister standing there looking at Connor as if he hung the moon and the stars. Connor took Jasmine's hands in his. He looked every bit the dashing prince in his tuxedo, the kind of man who belongs on the cover of a magazine. But I knew better. I looked at his hands and saw the hands of a thief. He cleared his throat, blinking back tears that I would bet my entire portfolio were practiced in the mirror this morning. Jasmine, my love. He began, his voice thick with fabricated emotion. From the moment I met you, I knew I wanted to build a world for us, a world where you are safe, a world where you are cherished. The audience let out a collective sigh. A few bridesmaids dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. I just sat there feeling the bile rise in my throat. It was a performance, a masterclass in deception. I promise to shelter you. Connor continued, his voice gaining strength. To provide for you. To be the rock you can lean on when the world gets heavy. I promise to be the man who makes your dreams come true through my own hard work and dedication. I scoffed. It was a quiet sound, but in the stillness of the garden, it felt loud. Hard work. The only thing Connor had worked hard on was manipulating my sister into draining her bank account. He had never worked a real day in his life. He lived on an allowance from a father who was drowning in debt, and now he was living on the money I had sweated for. We do not want that thing leaking oil on the pavement. I drove the Honda onto the dirt path, my blood boiling. The road was a disaster. Potholes the size of craters littered the way, and recent rains had turned the dust into a thick sludge. I had to park nearly half a mile away from the main house because the catering trucks had blocked the entrance. I stepped out of the car and immediately sank 2 inches into the mud. My sneakers, which were a rare collaboration piece I had just bought at auction, were instantly ruined. I looked down at the brown sludge coating my shoes and felt a cold, hard anger settle in my chest. This was how they treated people they deemed beneath them. It was not just about the car. It was the assumption. The instant categorization. I trekked through the mud, the sun beating down on my neck. By the time I reached the back entrance of the estate, I was sweating, my hair was frizzing, and my shoes were caked in dirt. I looked exactly like what they thought I was. Then came the line that made my blood run cold. Just like I worked tirelessly to buy our dream home in the hills, Connor said, squeezing Jasmine's hands tighter. I will work every day to make sure you never want for anything. That house is just the beginning of the kingdom I will build for you. Because you deserve a man who can give you everything. My jaw tightened so hard I felt a muscle jump in my cheek. He claimed the house. He stood there in front of God and 200 witnesses and claimed he bought the house with his own money. The house that was paid for with the wire transfer from my account. The house that was supposed to be Jasmine's security blanket. He was not just stealing the money, he was stealing the credit. He was erasing my contribution entirely, painting himself as the savior and me as the invisible donor. Jasmine beamed at him, her eyes shining with adoration. She believed him. She actually believed that her unemployed husband had somehow come up with $500,000 through hard work. The naivety was staggering. I felt a laugh bubbling up in my throat, a dangerous, hysterical thing. I clamped my hand over my mouth to suppress it. If I laughed now, I would not stop until I screamed. I looked around the garden at the nodding faces of the guests. They bought it too. They saw a successful young heir marrying a lucky girl. They did not see the predator and his prey. Just as the audience let out another collective awe over his lies, I felt a sudden impact against my shoulder. A tray hit my arm, followed immediately by the cold shock of liquid soaking through my sleeve. I gasped, looking down to see dark red wine spreading rapidly across the fabric of my navy blue dress. It was a Merlot, thick and dark-looking, alarmingly like blood on the dark fabric. I looked up to see a waiter standing over me. He was a young man with messy hair who looked more bored than sorry. He was holding a tray of half-empty glasses that he had been clearing from the pre-ceremony cocktail hour. "Oops," the waiter muttered. He did not sound surprised. He did not sound apologetic. "Sorry about that." He made a half-hearted motion to offer me a cocktail napkin, but then pulled his hand back as if touching me would contaminate him. He did not offer to get a towel. He did not offer to help me clean up. He just shrugged and turned, walking back into the catering tent, as if I was nothing more than a piece of furniture he had bumped into. I sat there, the cold wine seeping through to my skin, making me shiver. The smell of alcohol was overpowering. I grabbed a handful of paper napkins from the table next to me and dabbed frantically at the stain, but it was useless. The dress was ruined. I looked like a disaster. I felt eyes on me. I looked toward the front row. Preston Sterling had turned around in his seat, hearing the commotion. He looked at the waiter disappearing into the tent. Then he looked at me. He took in the sight of my soaked sleeve, the red stains spreading across my chest, and the pile of dirty napkins in my lap. And then he smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was a smirk of pure satisfaction. He raised his eyebrows slightly and gave a barely perceptible nod. It was a signal. He was telling me that I got what I deserved. In his eyes I was trash, and trash belonged covered in stains sitting by the kitchen. He wanted me to feel small. He wanted me to feel dirty and out of place so that I would shrink away and disappear. I looked at him, and for a second I wanted to cry. I wanted to run to the bathroom and hide. That is what the old Sophia would have done. The Sophia who just wanted to be accepted. But that Sophia died the moment they made her hold the handbags. I locked eyes with Preston, and I did not blink. I did not look away. I let my hands drop to my lap, ignoring the wine. I sat up straighter in my chair. "You think this makes me weak, Preston?" I thought, projecting the words toward him with every ounce of my will. "You think spilling wine on me changes who owns whom?" I checked the time on my phone. The ceremony was ending. The reception was about to begin. The wine incident was just the final seal on his fate. Preston turned back to the altar, satisfied that the pest in the back row had been neutralized. He probably thought I would leave now. He probably thought I would run away in shame to change my clothes or go home. He was wrong. I was not going anywhere. I would wear this wine stain like war paint. I would walk into that reception hall smelling like a vineyard, and I would burn his legacy to the ground. The priest pronounced them man and wife. Connor kissed Jasmine. The crowd cheered. I stood up slowly, my wet dress clinging to my skin. Clap while you can, I whispered to the backs of their heads. Because the applause is about to end. And when the music stops, I am the only one who will be left standing. The reception marquee was a cathedral of white silk and crystal chandeliers, erected right in the middle of the vineyard. It was air-conditioned to a shivering chill, a stark contrast to the heat of the garden. As I walked in, the smell of expensive lilies fought with the lingering scent of the red wine that was still drying on my dress. I could feel the sticky fabric clinging to my skin, a constant reminder of the waiter's carelessness and Preston's smirk. Most people would have gone to the bathroom to try and wash it out, or retreated to their car in shame. But I walked straight to my assigned table in the back corner, the one next to the swinging kitchen doors, and sat down. I wore that stain like a badge of honor. It was proof that I had survived their worst and I was still standing. The room was buzzing with the chatter of 200 guests. Waiters circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres that looked like tiny pieces of art. I watched Jasmine and Connor making their rounds accepting congratulations. Jasmine looked exhausted, her smile tight and strained, while Connor looked like he had just won the lottery. In a way, he thought he had. He thought he had secured the Bank of Sofia to fund his lavish lifestyle forever. The lights dimmed and a spotlight swept across the room, landing on the main stage. Preston Sterling stepped into the light holding a microphone like it was a scepter. He had changed his jacket probably because the humidity outside had wrinkled his linen suit. Now he was in a midnight blue tuxedo, looking every inch the wealthy patriarch he pretended to be. "Ladies and gentlemen," Preston boomed, his voice amplified to ear-splitting levels. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate the union of two families. Although let us be honest, it is mostly the union of the Sterling legacy with new potential." A ripple of polite laughter went through the room. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. He could not even welcome my sister without reminding everyone that she was the lucky one. Preston paced the stage, gesturing grandly to the opulent decorations. When my great-grandfather bought this land, he had a vision of excellence, a vision of prosperity that would last for generations. And tonight, looking around at this magnificent gathering, I can say with certainty that the Sterling name has never been stronger. We are expanding. We are conquering new markets. The fleet of Sterling shipping is the envy of the Pacific. I stifled a laugh. The envy of the Pacific. His ships were currently impounded in Oakland for safety violations and unpaid docking fees. The man was hallucinating. Preston raised his glass toward a table near the front, the same table where the men in gray suits were sitting. "And I want to give a special acknowledgement to our esteemed partners from Ocean Bank, Mr. Smith and his associates. Thank you for believing in our vision. We look forward to a very profitable future together starting first thing Monday morning." Mr. Smith did not smile. He simply raised his glass in a perfunctory toast, his eyes cold. He knew exactly what Monday morning would bring. He was not there to celebrate. He was there to make sure the collateral didn't disappear. Preston was parading his executioners around as if they were his best friends. It was pathetic. Then the spotlight moved. Preston scanned the room, his eyes searching until they landed on the back corner. "On me." And of course, Preston continued, his voice dropping to a tone of exaggerated pity. "We must acknowledge the bride's family, or rather her sister, since she is all the family Jasmine has left." The spotlight hit me blindingly bright. I did not flinch. I sat there in my wine-stained dress, staring straight back at him. "Sophia," Preston said, gesturing toward me with a limp hand. "The quiet sister, the one who works in the shadows so her sister could shine." We know you have had a hard life, Sophia. Jasmine has told us how much manual labor you had to do just to put food on the table. The room went silent. He was doing it again. He was painting me as the poor, uneducated laborer, the charity case. It warms my heart, Preston went on, to welcome you into a world you have probably only ever seen in movies. I hope you are enjoying the champagne. It is a vintage Dom Perignon. I imagine it is quite different from the beverages you are used to. But please drink up. Tonight you get to taste what real success feels like. He smiled a benevolent shark-like smile. To Sophia, the woman who sacrificed her youth in the warehouses so Jasmine could find her prince. Let us raise a glass to the help. A mess. I navigated through the chaos of the kitchen, dodging waiters carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The smell of roasted lamb and expensive perfume hit me as I pushed through the swinging doors into the main foyer. The house was magnificent. High ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the vineyard. It was the kind of wealth that screamed for attention. I paused for a moment, trying to wipe the mud off my shoes on the welcome mat, hoping to find Jasmine so I could get to my room and change. That was when he appeared. Preston Sterling, the patriarch of the family, and the man who owned this estate, walked out of the library. He was wearing a cream-colored linen suit that probably cost $5,000. He looked impeccable, and he looked straight through me. He did not see Sophia, the tech mogul. He did not see the woman who had paid for his son's honeymoon because his credit cards were maxed out. He raised his glass and the room followed suit, muttering to Sophia in a tone that sounded more like a condolence than a toast. He called me the help. He called me a warehouse worker. And he implied that I was too poor to know what good champagne tasted like. I sat there while 200 people looked at me with pity. They saw a woman in a dirty dress sitting by the kitchen. They saw exactly what Preston wanted them to see. But Preston had made a fatal error. He had handed me the microphone, metaphorically speaking. He had drawn every eye in the room to me. He wanted to use this moment to crush me, to put me in my place once and for all. I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. Preston faltered on stage, his smile wavering slightly. He expected me to nod and sit down. Or maybe to run away crying. I did not do either. I picked up my glass of champagne. I looked at the golden liquid bubbles rising to the surface. Then calmly and deliberately, I poured it onto the floor. The sound of the liquid splashing onto the parquet was audible in the sudden silence. I set the glass down. Then I walked. Not toward the exit, toward the stage. Preston's eyes widened. He covered the microphone with his hand, whispering something to the bandleader. But it was too late. I was already moving. I walked past the tables of whispering guests. I walked past the horrified bridesmaids. I walked past Mr. Smith, who actually sat up straighter, looking interested for the first time all night. I walked with the steady, rhythmic pace of a woman who owns the ground she walks on. Because I did. Literally. Preston laughed nervously into the microphone. Oh, it looks like Sophia wants to say a few words. Well, we are on a tight schedule, Sophia, so keep it brief. We know public speaking isn't your strong suit. I climbed the stairs to the stage. I stood next to him. I smelled the fear coming off him, mixed with his expensive cologne. He was trembling. He knew. Deep down, he knew he had pushed too far. I reached out and took the microphone from his hand. He tried to hold on to it, but I pulled it away with a force that surprised him. I tapped the microphone twice. Boom! Boom! The sound echoed through the tent, silencing the murmurs. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw Jasmine terrified in the front row. I saw Connor looking annoyed. And I saw Mr. Smith watching me with calculation. Brief. I said, my voice amplified, clear and commanding. You want me to be brief, Preston? Fine. I turned to look him dead in the eye. You mentioned my manual labor. You mentioned my hard life. You are right. I have worked hard. I worked hard to build Aurora Tech into a multi-billion-dollar company. I worked hard to acquire a portfolio of assets that includes commercial real estate, technology patents, and as of this morning, distressed maritime debt. I reached into my purse and pulled out the blue folder. You also mentioned that I have never seen luxury like this. You are right, I haven't. Because usually when I buy a property, I make sure the previous owner has actually paid the electric bill. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Preston lunged for the microphone, but I sidestepped him. I am not the help. Preston? I said, my voice turning to steel. I am the landlord, and I think it is time we discussed the rent. The main course arrived in a parade of silver cloches carried by an army of waiters who looked terrified of dropping anything. It was a display of gluttony that bordered on obscene. Surf and turf, but not just any surf and turf. We are talking about butter-poached lobster tails that were larger than my hand, and slabs of Wagyu beef that probably cost more per ounce than the wedding dress Jasmine was wearing. The smell of truffle oil and rich demi-glace filled the tent, mixing with the heavy scent of expensive perfume and the lingering metallic tang of the wine on my dress. At my table in the exile corner, the waiter placed a plate down in front of me without making eye contact. It was the same meal everyone else was getting, but somehow sitting there by the trash cans next to the kitchen swinging doors, it felt less like a dinner and more like a ration. I picked up my fork, my hand heavy. I was not hungry. My stomach was twisted in knots of rage and betrayal. I looked across the room at the head table. Jasmine was cutting into her steak. She took a bite and smiled at Connor. She was eating the food paid for by the debt I had just bought. She was feasting on my dime while letting her new family treat me like a stray dog. Then I saw him. Preston Sterling pushed back his chair at the head table. He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and stood up. He did not look happy. He looked bored. He looked like a man who was tired of pretending to be polite. He grabbed something from a passing waiter. It was a white styrofoam container, a cheap takeout box, the kind you get at a gas station deli or a roadside diner. It stood out starkly against the crystal and china of the reception. He began to walk toward my table. He bypassed the wealthy investors. He bypassed the cousins. He made a beeline for me, his eyes locked on mine with a predatory glint. The room seemed to quiet down as people noticed his movement. They sensed the tension. They sensed that the show was not over. Preston stopped right in front of my table. He towered over me, blocking the light from the chandeliers. He looked down at my plate, which I had barely touched. Then he looked at the styrofoam box in his hand. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed the box onto the table. It landed with a hollow thud right next to my water glass. It bounced once and settled there, an ugly white scar on the pristine tablecloth. Here, Preston said, his voice booming. He wanted everyone to hear. He wanted the bankers to hear. He wanted the editors to hear. Eat up quickly and then clear out. We need this table for the dessert station. He gestured to the box with a dismissive wave of his hand. And make sure you pack up your leftovers. I know how rare a meal like this is for people like you. Back home in that little apartment of yours, I am sure you are used to microwave dinners and frozen food. It must be nice to see real meat for a change. He paused, waiting for the punchline to land. Take it home, Sophia. It will probably feed you for a week. Poor thing. For a second there was silence. Absolute suffocating silence. Then the laughter started. It began at the table next to us where Connor's college friends were sitting. They roared with laughter, slapping the table. Then the bridesmaids joined in, giggling behind their hands. Even the bankers cracked a smile, thinking it was just a bit of harmless elitist humor. I looked at the styrofoam box. Then I looked at Jasmine. She was sitting less than 30 feet away. She had heard every word. She saw her husband's friends laughing. She saw her father-in-law treating the woman who raised her like a beggar. Jasmine stopped chewing. Her face went red. Her eyes filled with tears. She looked down at her plate, gripping her fork so hard her knuckles turned white. But she did not stand up. She did not say a word. She took a sip of water and looked away. That was the moment. That was the moment the last thread of sisterhood snapped. That was the moment the grief I had been holding on to turned into pure, unadulterated power. She chose the lobster over me. She chose the silence over me. I looked back at Preston. He was smirking, waiting for me to take the bait. He wanted me to cry. He wanted me to grab the box and run away in shame. He wanted to see me broken. Instead, I felt a strange calm wash over me. It was the calm of a CEO before a hostile takeover. It was the calm of a general before the cannon fire. I pushed my chair back. The sound was hideous. The metal legs of the chair scraped against the wooden floor with a high-pitched screech that cut through the laughter like a knife. It was a violent sound, a sound that said enough. The laughter died instantly. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my wine-stained dress. I did not look at the box. I did not look at the food. I looked straight at Preston. He took a half-step back, surprised by the sudden movement. He opened his mouth to say something, probably another insult, but I did not give him the chance. I turned and walked toward the stage. My heels clicked on the floor, a steady, rhythmic drumbeat of impending doom. I walked past the table of laughing frat boys, and they fell silent as I passed. I walked past the bridesmaids who shrank back in their seats. I walked past Jasmine, who finally looked up, her eyes wide with terror. She knew that walk. She had seen that walk when I marched into the principal's office to defend her from bullies. She had seen that walk when I negotiated our first business loan. She knew what was coming. "Sophia Dawn not," she whispered, but it was too late. I reached the stage where the wedding band was playing soft jazz. The lead singer, a guy in a tuxedo, saw me coming. He saw the look in my eyes. He stopped singing mid-note. I did not ask for permission. I reached out and snatched the microphone from the stand. The feedback squealed for a second, a sharp electronic shriek that made everyone in the room cover their ears. I gripped the microphone tight. The metal was cool against my palm. I stood center stage, bathed in the spotlight that was meant for speeches about love and legacy. I looked down at Preston, who was still standing by my table next to the styrofoam box. He looked small from up here. He saw a black woman in a hoodie with muddy shoes standing near the kitchen. He walked right up to me, not breaking his stride. He was holding a large black plastic bag, heavy with trash. "About time you got here," he snapped, thrusting the bag into my arms. I instinctively grabbed it to stop it from hitting the floor. The bag was heavy, and something inside was leaking. A cold, foul-smelling liquid dripped onto the front of my hoodie. "Excuse me," I started, my voice low. "Dawn, not give me excuses," Preston interrupted, waving a hand in my face. "The caterers are complaining about the overflow in the prep area. Take this to the dumpster behind the garage immediately. And when you come back, try to clean yourself up. We have high-profile guests arriving, and you look like you crawled out of a swamp. Honestly, it is so hard to find good help these days." He turned his heel and walked away, muttering about incompetence, leaving me standing in the middle of the foyer holding his garbage. He looked like exactly what he was. A man standing in a house he did not own, eating food he could not pay for, insulting the woman who held the deed to his life. I took a deep breath. The air in the room was electric. 200 pairs of eyes were fixed on me. They were waiting for an apology. They were waiting for a drunken rant. They were about to get a financial audit. I raised the microphone to my lips. The silence was heavy, pregnant with the destruction I was about to unleash. Preston started to move toward the stage, his face turning red, but he was too slow. I had the floor, I had the power, and I was about to serve the only dish that mattered. Cold, hard truth. The feedback from the microphone faded, leaving a ringing silence in the reception tent that was heavy enough to crush a lesser woman. But I did not feel crushed. Standing there on the stage, looking down at the sea of stunned faces, I felt lighter than I had in years. I looked at Preston Sterling, who was standing frozen by my table, his hand still extended, as if he could physically pull the words back into my mouth. He looked ridiculous in his expensive tuxedo, standing next to the cheap styrofoam box he had thrown at me. He had wanted to make a statement about my worth, but he had only succeeded in highlighting his own cruelty. I adjusted my grip on the microphone, my eyes locking onto his. I did not shout. I did not scream. I spoke with the calm, measured tone of a woman who is about to fire an incompetent employee. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling, for the doggy bag," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the tent, reaching every corner, every banker, and every guest. "It was very thoughtful of you to worry about my next meal. But I think the person who is going to need this box is you. Because after tonight, you are not going to have enough money to buy a meal at McDonald's, let alone leftovers from a banquet you did not pay for." A gasp went through the room like a wave. Preston's face turned a mottled shade of crimson. He took a step toward the stage, his mouth opening to shout something, but I raised a hand, stopping him in his tracks. "I am not finished," I said sharply. "You wanted to talk about finances, Preston. You wanted to talk about who pays for what. You stood up here and bragged about your family's wealth. You toasted to your legacy. But I think it is time we looked at the receipts. Literally." I pulled my phone out of my pocket. As the CEO of a tech company that specializes in secure data transfer, connecting to the unsecured audio-visual system of a wedding tent was child's play. I had already bypassed their firewall while I was walking to the stage. With a single tap of my thumb, I overrode the slideshow of Jasmine and Connor's engagement photos that was looping on the massive LED screen behind me. The romantic pictures of them walking on the beach vanished. In their place, a stark high-definition image of a bank statement appeared. It was magnified so large that people in the back row could read the account numbers. "Let us take a look at this," I said, turning slightly to gesture at the screen. "This is a wire transfer from yesterday morning. Time-stamped 9:00 a.m. Originating account, Sophia King. Destination account, Jasmine Sterling. Amount $500,000. I paused, letting the number sink in. "And here is the next transaction." I continued swiping my screen to show the next slide. Time-stamped 9:15 a.m. Transferred from Jasmine Sterling to Connor Sterling. Personal checking account. I looked down at Connor, who was sitting at the head table, looking like he was about to vomit. Connor told everyone in this room that he bought the dream house in the hills with his own hard-earned money, I said, my voice dripping with disdain. He claimed he was a provider, a self-made man. But looking at these numbers, it seems the only thing Connor knows how to make is a withdrawal from my bank account. The room erupted into whispers. People were pointing at the screen, checking the dates, doing the math. The bankers in the front row were leaning forward, their eyes narrowed. They knew what a fraudulent asset looked like, and they were looking right at one. "But that is just the house," I said, cutting through the noise. "Let us talk about this wedding. This beautiful, lavish display of wealth that Preston is so proud of." I swiped the screen again. A credit card statement appeared. It was a black card statement with my name clearly visible at the top. "The $50,000 Vera Wang dress Jasmine is wearing paid by me. The $20,000 for these flowers that are wilting in the heat paid by me. The $10,000 deposit for the venue paid by me." I walked to the edge of the stage, looking directly at the table where Connor's frat brothers were sitting, the ones who had laughed at me. "You laughed when your friend called me the help. You laughed when his father called me poor. But look at the screen. Every bite of steak you just ate, every drop of champagne you drank, was paid for by the woman you are mocking." I turned my gaze to Connor. He was shrinking in his seat, looking smaller and smaller with every second that passed. "You called me a warehouse worker, Connor. You sneered at my job. But the truth is, I work. I build. I create value. What do? You lie to your fiancé. You steal from her sister. And you use your father's fading name to con banks into giving you loans you can never repay." I took a step closer to the edge of the stage, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that the microphone picked up perfectly. "I have met a lot of people in my life, Connor. I have met sharks in business suits and liars in boardrooms. But you are something special. You are the most shameless gold digger I have ever met. You are not marrying my sister because you love her. You are marrying her because you thought I was a bottomless piggy bank that you could break open whenever you wanted." I looked at Jasmine. She was staring at the screen, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She was seeing the timestamps. She was seeing the truth in black and white. The money she thought was going to their future had gone straight into his personal debt hole. Jasmine. I said, my voice softening just a fraction. Look at him. Look at the man who made you sign a prenup to protect assets he does not even have. He does not have a kingdom, Jasmine. He has a mountain of debt and a personality built on lies. He told you I was jealous. He told you I was bitter. But the only thing I am right now is the owner of every single thing in this room. I turned back to Preston, who was now gripping the edge of his table, his knuckles white. You called me the help, Preston, I repeated. Well, I am helping you now. I am helping you see reality. You thought you could invite me here, take my money, insult me, and then kick me out with a box of leftovers. You thought I was weak because I was quiet, but you forgot the most important rule of business. Never mistreat the investor who holds your mortgage. I swiped the screen one last time. The bank statements disappeared. In their place, a legal document appeared. It was a foreclosure notice stamped and notarized with today's date. I am not just the sister of the bride, I said, my voice ringing out like a judgment bell. I am the new owner of Sterling Vineyards, and as the owner, I have a strict policy against gold diggers and liars on my property. The silence that followed was total. It was the silence of a world ending. The Sterling legacy built on smoke and mirrors had just been shattered by a woman in a wine-stained dress holding a microphone and a smartphone. I lowered the microphone just an inch, looking at Preston's pale face. So, Preston, about that doggy bag. You might want to pick it up. It is the only thing you are leaving here with. Preston Sterling looked like a man who was drowning, and I was the ocean that was swallowing him whole. The foreclosure notice on the screen behind me was looming over his head like a guillotine, but he still had one last desperate instinct left. The instinct of a bully who thinks force can solve what money cannot. He turned his purple face away from me and looked toward the perimeter of the tent where 4 burly security guards were standing, their arms crossed over their chests. Security, Preston screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. Get her off the stage! Remove this woman immediately! She is trespassing! She is hacking our systems! Drag her out of here now! The guests gasped, clutching their pearls and their champagne flutes. Jasmine stood up halfway, her hand reaching out as if to stop them, but she froze. She was still too afraid to move. The security guards unfolded their arms. They were big men hired for their size and their ability to intimidate. They took a step toward the stage, their heavy boots thudding on the grass. Preston smirked, a flicker of triumph returning to his eyes. He thought that because he was wearing a tuxedo and I was wearing a wine-stained dress, he still commanded the room. I did not move. I did not flinch. I simply turned my head and looked directly at the head of security, a man named Mike, whom I had seen checking his phone nervously by the buffet earlier. Stop, I said. I did not shout it. I said it with the same tone I used to pause a board meeting. Low, calm, absolute. The guards hesitated. Preston waved his arms frantically. Do not listen to her. I am paying you to do a job. I looked down at the bag. Then I looked at his retreating back. My first instinct was to drop the bag right there on his Persian rug. But then I remembered the phone call I had with my banker just before I got on the plane. I remembered the file in my bag. No, dropping the trash would be too easy, too messy. I tightened my grip on the plastic bag. I would take out his trash, all right, but I was going to take out a lot more than just the garbage. I walked toward the door, my ruined sneakers squeaking on the marble floor. You want me to be the help, Preston? I whispered to myself. Fine. I will help you. I will help you lose everything. This was just the beginning. The wedding rehearsal was in 2 hours, and I had a feeling the main course was going to be served with a side of absolute destruction. After scrubbing the garbage juice off my hoodie in a bathroom that was larger than my first apartment, I made my way to the rehearsal dinner. Throw her out. I smiled a cold, dangerous smile. Actually, Preston, That is the problem, I said, speaking into the microphone. You are not paying them. I turned back to the guards. Mike, check your bank app. Go ahead. I will wait. Mike looked at me, then he looked at Preston. Confusion clouded his face. Slowly he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The other 3 guards did the same. You see, gentlemen, I continued, addressing the security team directly. Preston here wrote you checks for tonight's service on Friday, but checks take time to clear, Dawn, not they. And when the bank opened this morning at 9 o'clock, those checks hit an account that had a balance of 0. Mike stared at his screen. His face went pale. He looked up at Preston, his expression shifting from obedience to anger. It bounced. Mike said, his voice gruff and loud enough for the front row to hear. Insufficient funds. Preston sputtered. That is a mistake. It is a banking error. I will fix it on Monday. Just get her out of here. I laughed. He will not fix it, Mike, because there is nothing to fix. The money is gone. But do not worry. I reached into my purse and pulled out a stack of crisp $100 bills. I always carry emergency cash when I deal with volatile assets. I am hiring you now. Your job is to make sure nobody leaves this tent until I am finished speaking. Especially Mr. Sterling. I tossed the stack of cash to Mike. He caught it. He counted it with a quick, practiced thumb. Then he looked at Preston and crossed his arms again. But this time he was not protecting the groom's father. He was guarding me. Preston stood there, abandoned by his own muscle. He looked small. He looked defeated. But I was not done. I had taken his house. I had taken his security. Now it was time to take his reputation. I turned back to the audience. Earlier tonight, Preston made a joke about my career. He told you I worked in shipping. He told you I spent my life moving boxes in a warehouse. He wanted you to believe I was unskilled labor. I walked to the edge of the stage, scanning the faces in the crowd. I recognized them, not socially but professionally. I knew their companies, I knew their supply chains, and I knew their pain points. He was half right, I said. I do work in shipping, but I do not move boxes. I move economies. I pointed to a heavy-set man in the 3rd row who was sweating profusely. Mr. Henderson, you own Henderson Steel, right? You have been waiting for a shipment of raw materials from Shanghai for 3 weeks. Your factory in Ohio is at a standstill. You are losing $50,000 a day. Mr. Henderson's jaw dropped. How do you know that? He stammered. And you, Mrs. Davis, I said, pointing to an elegant woman in red. You represent the textile consortium. Your fall line is delayed because your containers are stuck in port. You were told it was a customs glitch. I turned back to Preston, who was now gripping the table for support. Preston told you all that Sterling Shipping is the envy of the Pacific. He told you his fleet is expanding. He told you to trust him with your most valuable cargo. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Let me introduce myself properly. My name is Sophia King. I am the founder and CEO of Aurora Tech. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. The name Aurora Tech hit them like a physical blow. They knew the name. Everyone in business knew the name. We were the unicorn startup that had revolutionized global logistics software. We were the company that 70% of the people in this room used to track their inventory. I saw the realization dawning on their faces. The whispers started instantly. Sophia King, the tech billionaire, the logistics queen, she is the sister. Oh my God. I continued, my voice rising with authority. My software tracks every container, every ship, and every truck in the global supply chain. I see everything. And do you know what I see when I look at Sterling Shipping? I gestured to the screen behind me. The foreclosure notice disappeared and was replaced by a map, a live satellite tracking map of the Pacific Ocean. There were red dots scattered across the water. I see a disaster, I said. Those red dots are Preston's ships. They are not moving. And do you know why they are not moving? I looked at Mr. Henderson. Your steel is not stuck because of a storm, Mr. Henderson. It is stuck because Preston Sterling has not paid his fuel bills in 6 months. His ships are dead in the water because suppliers refuse to refuel them. I looked at Mrs. Davis. And your textiles, Mrs. Davis? They are sitting in a container in Oakland, but they are not being held by customs for inspection. They are being held by the IRS. I turned to face Preston, who was shaking his head, muttering no, 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 over and over again. Sterling Shipping is being investigated for tax evasion on a massive scale, I announced, dropping the bomb that would destroy his business forever. Preston has been falsifying manifests to avoid import duties. He has been using your cargo, your livelihoods, as collateral for high-risk loans to fund his lavish lifestyle. To fund this wedding. The room erupted. It wasn't just whispers anymore. It was shouting. People were standing up, pulling out their phones, calling their lawyers, calling their operations managers. My cargo is on those ships, Mr. Henderson shouted, his face red. Preston, you lied to us, Mrs. Davis screamed, abandoning all decorum. I stood calmly in the center of the storm I had created. If you are waiting for a shipment from Sterling Shipping, I have bad news, I said, cutting through the noise. It is not coming. The assets are frozen. The company is insolvent. I paused, letting the panic settle in. Then I offered the lifeline. However, the room quieted down, desperate for a solution. Because I am now the owner of the debt holding these assets, I have the authority to release the cargo. Aurora Tech has already deployed our own fleet to intercept the stranded vessels. We are paying the fuel bills. We are settling the tax liens. I looked at Mr. Henderson. Your steel will be in Ohio by Tuesday. I looked at Mrs. Davis. Your textiles will be delivered by Wednesday. I looked at the bankers in the front row. And gentlemen, your loans are secured. Not by Preston Sterling, but by me. By Sophia King. The relief in the room was palpable. It was physical. I saw shoulders drop. I saw people breathing again. In the span of 5 minutes, I had destroyed their trust in Preston and positioned myself as their savior. I looked down at Preston one last time. He was slumped in a chair, his tuxedo looking like a costume on a broken actor. He had lost his house. He had lost his business. And he had lost the respect of every peer he had ever tried to impress. You called me a delivery girl, Preston, I said softly into the microphone. Well, I just delivered the truth. And I delivered your clients to a better provider. I looked at Connor, who was staring at me with a mixture of terror and greed. He was probably calculating if he could divorce Jasmine and marry me instead. And now that we have settled the business logistics, I said, my voice hardening, let us talk about family. Because unlike shipping, family is something you cannot fix with a check. I dropped the microphone to my side. The business lesson was over. The personal reckoning was about to begin. Preston Sterling screamed so loud that his voice cracked, breaking into a high-pitched squeal that sounded nothing like the dignified patriarch he pretended to be. His face was a map of pure desperation, veins bulging against his crimson skin as he pointed a trembling finger at me. Liar, he shrieked, spitting the words out. You are a dirty liar. You are trying to bluff me in front of my guests. This is my house. My grandfather built this estate. My name is on the gate. I will sue you for slander. I will sue you for defamation. I will ruin you. He looked around the room, frantically seeking allies, seeking anyone who would stand up and validate his delusion. Mr. Smith, tell her, Preston pleaded, turning to the banker in the front row. Tell this crazy woman who holds the title. Tell her she cannot just walk in here and claim my property. I stood perfectly still on the stage, watching his meltdown with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a lab rat. I did not need to shout. I did not need to scream. I had something far more powerful than volume. I had the paperwork. I reached into my leather tote bag, the one the bridesmaids had sneered at earlier. I pulled out a thick, heavy folder. It was bound in blue legal cardstock and stamped with the official seal of the county clerk. The sound of the heavy document hitting the podium was a dull thud that echoed in the silent tent. I opened the folder slowly, deliberately, letting the suspense build. I smoothed out the top document. You are right, Preston, I said, my voice calm and amplifying clearly through the speakers. Your name was on the gate. Past tense. I picked up the document and held it up. It was a transfer of deed. You asked Mr. Smith to verify the title. Why do not we ask him? I looked down at Mr. Smith, who was sitting very still, clutching his briefcase. He looked at Preston with a mixture of pity and professional detachment. Mr. Smith, I said, addressing the banker directly. Did Ocean Bank hold a distress sale of non-performing assets this morning at 8 o'clock? Mr. Smith cleared his throat. The dining hall was a cavernous room lit by hundreds of beeswax candles that probably cost more than my rental car. A long mahogany table stretched down the center set with crystal glasses and silver that gleamed under the chandeliers. I scanned the seating arrangement, looking for my name near the head of the table where the immediate family usually sat. I expected to be next to Jasmine, or at least across from her, but as I walked past the seats reserved for the Sterling family and their wealthy friends, I realized my name was nowhere to be found. I kept walking further and further down the table until I reached the very end. There, next to the swinging kitchen door, where the servers rushed in and out, was a small crumpled napkin with Sophia scrawled on it in ballpoint pen. I was not seated with the family. I was seated in the exile zone. To my left was an elderly aunt, who was already asleep and snoring softly into her soup. He stood up slowly, straightening his tie. He did not look at Preston. He looked at me. Yes, Ms. King, he said, his voice quiet but audible. The bank initiated a liquidation of the Sterling portfolio due to default on payments, and I continued keeping my eyes locked on Preston. Who purchased that portfolio, Mr. Smith? Who bought the debt, the mortgage on this house, the liens on the ships, and the commercial loans for the vineyard? Mr. Smith took a breath. A private equity firm called Sophia Holdings, LLC. The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Sophia Holdings. Preston whispered, the color draining from his face until he looked like a ghost. No, that is impossible. You cannot have that kind of liquidity. I closed the folder with a sharp snap. I do not just have the liquidity, Preston, I have the deed. I bought your debt for cents on the dollar because the bank knew you were finished. They were desperate to get you off their books, and I was happy to oblige. I walked around the podium, stepping closer to the edge of the stage so there was nothing between us. So here is the reality of your situation. You are standing on my stage, you are drinking my champagne, and you are shouting at the owner of the house you are currently trespassing in. Preston sank back against the table, his legs giving out. He looked at the tent around him, the crystal chandeliers, the silk drapes, the flowers. 10 minutes ago it was his kingdom. Now it was just a stage set for his humiliation. You cannot do this, he stammered, his voice weak. My family. We have lived here for 50 years. You cannot just kick us out. It is illegal. Squatters' rights. I have rights. I laughed, a cold, sharp sound. Squatters' rights imply you have been living here without a lease. But you did have a mortgage, Preston. A mortgage you failed to pay for 18 months. The foreclosure process was expedited because of the commercial nature of the loans. My lawyers filed the final eviction notice the moment the wire transfer cleared. I pulled another piece of paper from the folder, a red piece of paper. This is a notice to quit, I said, holding it up. Usually in these situations, the new owner might give the previous tenants a few days to organize their affairs. Maybe a week if they are generous. I paused, looking at the wine stain on my dress. I looked at the table where I had been seated next to the trash. I looked at Jasmine, who was weeping silently into her hands. But you were not generous to me, Preston. You treated me like dirt. You tried to steal from me. You insulted my dignity. So why should I extend a courtesy to you that you never showed to me? I checked the expensive watch on my wrist. It is currently 8:30 p.m. The reception was scheduled to end at midnight. I am canceling the party. I looked at Preston with eyes as cold as ice. You have 30 minutes. Preston blinked, confusion clouding his eyes. 30 minutes for what? 30 minutes to go into the main house, pack your personal essentials, and get off my property, I said. And when I say essentials, I mean clothing and toiletries. Anything of value, art, jewelry, furniture stays. That is all collateral now. It belongs to Sophia Holdings. But where will we go? Preston cried, looking at his wife who had fainted in her chair. We have nowhere to go. I shrugged. That sounds like a logistics problem, Preston. And as we established earlier, I am the expert in logistics, but you are not my client. Maybe you can stay at a motel. Or maybe you can sleep on one of your ships, assuming you can find a rowboat to get out to them. I turned to the security team. Mike, the head guard, was watching me, waiting for orders. Mike, I said, please escort Mr. Sterling and his immediate family to the main house. Supervise their packing. Make sure they do not take anything that does not belong to them. If they try to steal so much as a silver spoon, call the police. Yes, Ms. King, Mike said, stepping forward. He grabbed Preston by the arm. Mr. Sterling, let us go. Preston tried to shake him off, but the fight had gone out of him. He looked at Connor, hoping his son would save him. But Connor was busy trying to hide behind a floral arrangement, looking like he wanted to dissolve into the floor. I watched them start to drag him away. A man who started the day as a king and was ending it as a vagrant. Oh, and Preston, I called out. He stopped, turning his head to look at me one last time, with eyes full of hatred and despair. I pointed to the table where he had thrown the styrofoam box. It was still sitting there, white and ugly against the fine linen. Do not forget your leftovers, I said, my voice cutting through the silence. You threw that box at me because you thought I needed charity. But looking at your financial future, I think you are going to need that meal a lot more than I do. Take it. Consider it a severance package. Preston stared at the box. Then he stared at me. For a moment I thought he would spit on me. But he did not. His pride was broken. His ego was shattered. Slowly, with a shaking hand, he reached out and picked up the box. He clutched it to his chest like it was a life raft. Mike pushed him forward. Move it, Mike grunted. I watched them leave the tent, the father, the mother, the son, and the golden child's sister. They walked out into the darkness, leaving the brightness of the party behind. I turned back to the guests. 200 people were staring at me in shock. The music had stopped. The food was getting cold. I realized I was still holding the microphone. To our remaining guests, I said, my voice softening, returning to professional calmness. I apologize for the interruption. The wedding is obviously over. However, the food is paid for and the wine is open. You are welcome to stay and finish your meal. But the Sterling family no longer resides here. If you are looking for them, check the Motel 6 down the highway. I placed the microphone back on the stand. I picked up my blue folder. I walked down the stairs of the stage, my head held high. I walked past the table where I had been sitting. I picked up my purse. I looked at the empty chair next to the kitchen. Goodbye, Sophia the victim, I thought. I walked out of the tent into the cool night air. The stars were shining above the vineyard. My vineyard. I took a deep breath. It smelled of grapes and damp earth. It smelled of victory. I had raised my sister alone. I had built a company from nothing. And tonight, I had taken out the trash. I walked toward the main house to inspect my new property. There was a lot of work to do. I had to remodel. I had to smudge the bad energy out of the place. But first I was going to take a long hot bath in the master suite. And maybe, just maybe, I would order a pizza. Because I could afford it. And because it would taste better than any lobster paid for with lies. The chaos that followed my announcement was not loud. It was a suffocating implosion of dignity. Victoria Sterling, the woman who had sneered at my job description earlier, let out a soft gasp and slid out of her chair, fainting dead away onto the grass. 2 waiters rushed to fan her, but nobody else moved. They were too busy watching the king fall. Preston Sterling was on his knees, not metaphorically, but literally. He had collapsed near the edge of the stage, grasping at the hem of his wife's dress, but his eyes were fixed on me. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost named Poverty. Sophia, please, he croaked, his voice a broken whisper that barely carried over the wind. We can work this out. We are family now. You cannot destroy family. I looked down at him and felt nothing. No pity, no anger, just the cold indifference of a balanced ledger. We are not family, Preston, I said simply. We are just business associates and our contract has expired. But while Preston was groveling, Connor was calculating. I saw the gears turning in his eyes. He saw his inheritance evaporate. He saw his lifestyle burning to the ground. And in his panic, he did what parasites always do. He looked for a new host. He turned to Jasmine. My sister was standing frozen near the head table, her face pale, her hands trembling by her sides. She looked like a statue of grief. Connor rushed to her, closing the distance with desperate strides. He grabbed her hands, squeezing them tight, trying to force an intimacy that was no longer there. Jasmine, baby, look at me. Connor pleaded, his voice thick with fake sincerity. You have to believe me. I did not know. I swear to God I did not know about the tax evasion. I did not know about the debt. My dad, he kept me in the dark. He used me just like he used you. He was throwing his own father under the bus to save his skin. It was pathetic, but it was also dangerous. Connor was charming. That was his weapon. He knew exactly how to twist reality to make Jasmine feel like they were partners against the world. We are victims here, Jasmine. Connor continued, his eyes wide and pleading. You and me against them. We can fix this. Your sister, she is confused, she is angry. But if you talk to her, if you explain that we love each other, she will stop this. She will give us the house back. She has to. She loves you. I watched Jasmine's face. For a second I saw her waver. Old habits die hard, and the habit of believing Connor Sterling was a survival mechanism she had practiced for 2 years. She looked at his handsome face, the face she had promised to love forever, and I saw the doubt creeping in. I knew I had to intervene. I could destroy their finances, but only Jasmine could destroy the emotional hold he had on her. I stepped off the stage.